Hi, my name is Dallin Chumway. This presentation is called Behaviorism, Bells and Hammers. I am a student studying psychology, so I'm in the Department of Behavioral Sciences at Utah Valley University, and this presentation is for the class Family Science 1100, Development Across the Lifespan. Let me dive in here. We're talking about behaviorism, and specifically, we're going to look at the guy who really made behaviorism popular, made it take off, John B. Watson. Not only was he the popularizer of behaviorism, but he really, I say here, beefed up. Maybe that term beefed up is a little misleading. Essentially, he took the discoveries that were made by a guy years before him named Pavlov, and he made them much more useful than they had been previously. I'll talk more about that in a minute. He rejected the idea that psychology should study people's consciousness. He argued that we can't really observe what's going on in people's minds, so we should rather focus on what their outward behaviors are. And he's known for what's called the Little Albert experiment. I'll talk more about all of these things as we go. First, let me touch on the influence that he has had on behaviorism. First, I want to talk about Pavlov a little bit. So Pavlov was a Russian doctor, and he noticed that dogs that he was working with would salivate when they were brought food. Cool, that's not too surprising. I, as a human, salivate when I'm brought food. But what was cool was that after doing some experiments, Pavlov noticed that the dogs would salivate not only when they were exposed to food, but also when they were exposed to stimuli that had been going on when the food was brought to them. So every time he brought them food, he rang a bell. He did that over and over again, and eventually, ringing the bell would make the dogs salivate. Watson learned about this. He didn't fully appreciate the significance of these ideas at first, but he later used these discoveries that Pavlov had made to formulate the theory of behaviorism. So behaviorism is essentially the idea that our brains can learn to do things without us really thinking about them based on stimuli that we're exposed to in our environments and how our brains interpret that stimuli. For example, you as a dog, you're exposed to a bell ringing, your brain interprets that ringing bell to mean there's food, and then whenever the bell rings, your body reacts as if there is food, even if no food is actually brought. Watson argued that, I mentioned this earlier, that psychology should not be the study of the mind, but rather the study of behavior, because the mind isn't something that we can observe. Behavior is. Let me talk a little bit more about Little Albert. I mentioned that he is known for the Little Albert experiment. This is me, and I am wearing in addition to being dressed up, because I think this was after church when I was younger, I am wearing this white, fluffy animal pelt. What happened in the Little Albert experiment was that Watson exposed this child named Albert to a white rat and to other white fluffy things. These are things that a child would have no reason to be frightened of. But then, every time he exposed the child to these white fluffy things, he also exposed the child to something terrifying, such as the loud sound of a hammer banging. And eventually, the child would become frightened even when there was no hammer banging, but just at the sight of the white rat or some other white fluffy thing. The impact that this idea that Watson brought forth, the impact that it has on psychology today is, first of all, if we look at the definition of psychology, according to Wikipedia, it's the scientific study of mind and behavior. So Watson argued that psychology shouldn't focus on the mind, it should focus on behavior. And other theorists later said, no, we need to focus on both, because you can't just explain everything based on observable behavior. And so now we have this well-rounded definition of studying both. In addition to that, the idea of behaviorism is really able to explain a lot of the phenomenon that we see in development. Here are my references. This first one is where I got the idea that behaviorism is something that helps us to explain what we see in the field of development. It's a book about development, actually. This next one is where I learn more about the little Albert experiment and more about behaviorism, and I was able to articulate behaviorism based on what I saw in this video. And these two Wikipedia articles, the first one, the one John B. Watson, is where I learned about Watson, his life, what he's known for, and what he argued we should be studying. And the second one is where I got the definition of psychology that I used. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching.